Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the goal of this particular first lesson is to understand the phrase, all students take calculus, which is an interesting phrase. Let's go ahead and begin. I want to take a look at naming quadrants of angles given various clues. And all students take calculus will help us do just that. Here it says, find the signs of the trig functions in each quadrant. Let's start with a filled out unit circle, and let's take a look at quadrant number 1. One question that you may be asked is, which functions are positive in quadrant number 1? Well, as we take a look at quadrant number 1, one thing we realize is our first values right here, square root of 3 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, a half. These are all positive fractions, but these are cosine values, so cosine is going to be positive. If you take the reciprocal of each one of these, you're going to also end up getting a positive fraction. For instance, 2 over square root of 3 is still positive, but 2 over square root of 3 would be the secant of 30. And so secant is going to be positive as well. In class, we called cosine and secant cousins because they were related in that sense. One is the reciprocal of the other. What about the sine? The sine is the second value, and these are all positive here. So we can say that the sine is positive, along with its cousin, cosecant. That should be a C there. What about the tangent? Well, to get tangent, we do sine over cosine, and here it's a positive divided by a positive, which is going to be positive. So tangent is positive as well in the first quadrant. And the cousin behaves just like tangent in the first quadrant. So every single trig function is positive. All are positive. Let's go ahead and move on and take a look at quadrant number 2. For angles with their terminal side in quadrant number 2, which angles would end up being positive? Well, as we take a look at the first values, the cosine values, these are negative. So cosine is not going to work. Won't be on our list. So we look at the second values. These are the sine values. These are positive, so we can list sine here, along with its cousin, cosecant. Finally, what about tangent? Well, to get tangent, we're going to take sine over cosine, and here it's a positive divided by a negative, which is negative, and this is also positive divided by a negative, same sign, negative, etc. So tangent will be negative, leaving us only sine and cosecant being positive in quadrant number 2. If we do the same type of thinking and reasoning for quadrant number 3, we're going to find out that the positive functions in quadrant number 3 are going to be tangent and cotangent. If we do the similar sort of reasoning in our final quadrant, quadrant number 4, which functions are going to be positive here? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to pause the video, think about it. All right, so the functions that are going to be positive in quadrant number 4 will end up being the first value right here, cosine, not sine, and then secant. Now, this is quite a bit of information to keep in mind when we work through trigonometry problems. And so the phrase, all students take calculus, helps us basically keep all of this together. Let me show you where all students take calculus comes from. If you look at quadrant number 1, this is all the trig functions, so that's all. If we look at quadrant number 2, sine starts with an S, so does students, so all students. In quadrant number 3, tan starts with a T. Take also starts with a T. And in quadrant number 4, cosine starts with a C. C. So all students take calculus. All, sine, tangent, cosine. Let's take a look at that briefly. On the back of this sheet is a summary. And it just tells us all students take calculus, reminds us which trig functions are positive. That's all that it tells us. So let's take a look at quadrant number 1. If we go ahead and copy down the letter A in quadrant number 1, and we copy down the letter S in quadrant number 2, And we copy the letter T in quadrant number 3. And we copy the letter C in quadrant number 4. We're ready to see this in action. A stands for all, which means all our trig functions are positive. S stands for sine, but sine has the same sign as cosecant. So sine and cosecant go together, and these are going to be positive in quadrant number 2. That's supposed to be a 2 there. But what about the other trig functions? Here we have sine and cosecant. What about cosine and secant and tangent and cotangent? All those others will be negative. So let's write that here to be very clear. All others are negative. Quadrant number 3. Let's take a look at quadrant number 3. T is tangent, and we'll put cotangent along with it. Tangent and cotangent are positive. What about sine, secant, cosine, cosecant? All those others will be negative as well. And then in our quadrant number 4, the final quadrant, cosine is going to be positive along with secant, SEC. And all the other trig functions are negative in addition. So this is going to help us with some problems. A lot of problems. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of those underneath the squiggly line. Here it says, given the clues, name the quadrant of theta. So theta is an angle. And what we need to do is this. If sine theta is greater than 0, or sine theta is positive, and if cosine theta is less than 0, or cosine theta is negative, what quadrant is theta going to be locked in to exist in? It could be in quadrants 1, 2, 3, or 4, and what we can do is we can go ahead and use a coordinate plane and figure that out. Let's go ahead and make a rough sketch right here and organize our information. Here they tell us sine theta is greater than 0. What does that mean? Which quadrant are we in? Let's think about this for a minute. If we look above, where's sine theta positive? Well, in quadrant number 1, all functions are positive, so that works. In quadrant number 2, sine and cosecant are positive, so sine is going to be positive in these first 2 quadrants. Let's go ahead and circle those first 2 quadrants right there. Now let's look at the last piece of information. Cosine theta is negative. Where's cosine theta negative? Well, let's look above. Where's cosine theta negative? Well, everything's positive here, so that doesn't work. Here, only sine and cosecant are positive. All others are negative. So cosine is going to be negative here. And similarly, it's going to be negative right there. By the way, let me go ahead and put the word positive there just to be clear. And so now we're in quadrants 2 and 3. So let's put a circle in quadrants 2 and 3. Now, where the circles overlap, that's the quadrant that theta is in. So theta will be in quadrant number 2. Let's try one more example here before I have you try some on your own. Let's take a look at number 2. Here it says sine theta is less than 0, so sine theta is negative. Cosine theta greater than 0, so cosine theta is positive. Let's organize our information. Where's sine theta less than 0? Well, let's look above. Sine theta is not going to be negative here because everything's positive. It's not going to be negative here. So it's going to be negative in these 2 quadrants, quadrants 3 and 4. Let's go ahead and put a circle in quadrants 3 and 4. And now let's use the second piece of information. Cosine theta is positive. Where's cosine theta positive? Let's look up here. Everything's positive here, and so that includes cosine. So cosine's positive here. Cosine's also positive down here, so that's quadrants 1 and 4. Let's go ahead and put a circle in quadrants 1 and 4. Where the circles meet, that's the quadrant we're in, so we are obviously in quadrant 4. Any questions? You can't ask questions here. I'm really sorry about that. All right, here's what I want to have you do. I want to have you go ahead and now try problems 3 and 4 just the same way. So pause the video, try 3 and 4, then we'll go through that. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at these last two problems. For number 3, they say tangent theta is less than 0 or negative. Let's see where tangent is going to be negative. When we look right up here, tangent is negative. It's not going to be negative here, but it'll be negative here and here. So in these two quadrants, so I'm going to go ahead and put a little circle there. It's going to look sort of like an infinity sign so the circle doesn't cross over into the other quadrants. These are the two quadrants where tangent is negative. Let's take a look at the second piece of information. Cosine is negative as well. Where's cosine negative? Well, we just did that right up here. Cosine was negative in these two quadrants. So let's go ahead and circle that. Circles do overlap right here. And that puts us in quadrant number 2. Let's try the last problem. In the last one, we're going to go ahead and draw this out. Here it says secant is greater than 0. Now, if they give you secant being positive, you could, of course, use this and say, oh, secant's positive here. Everything's positive here. That puts us in this in these two quadrants. Or another way to handle secant is because it has the same sign as cosine. You could look for cosine up here. Either way, you're going to get 1 and 4, where secant is going to be positive. So let's go ahead and put a circle in quadrants 1 and 4. The next part right here, cotangent is negative. Cotangent is going to be negative here and also here. So we're going to put one of those right here with a circle in quadrant 1 and 4. I'm sorry, 2 and 4. Intersect right there. So we are in quadrant number 4. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, now that we've gone through this, and I still got to get used to showing everything I do here on the video, I want you to look at the second video before you do the homework. Thank you.